The weathered cuneiform tablets unearthed from the ancient ruins of Nippur between 1888 and 1900 contain what may be humanity's oldest written records of a world fundamentally different from our own. Among the thousands of clay fragments catalogued by the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, a particular collection stands out not for its administrative content or religious poetry, but for its matter-of-fact descriptions of a time when divine beings walked among humans as administrators, teachers, and rulers. These texts, written in archaic Sumerian script dating to approximately 3200 BC, describe not mythology, but what appears to be institutional memory. Detailed accounts of governance structures, territorial divisions, technological capabilities, and social organizations that existed before the Great Flood forever altered the relationship between heaven and earth. What makes these earlier Sumerian records particularly compelling is their bureaucratic tone. Unlike later Babylonian epics that transformed ancient events into mythological narratives, the Nippur tablets read like administrative reports, census records, and operational manuals. They describe divine councils making policy decisions, territorial boundaries being established through astronomical calculations, technological infrastructure requiring regular maintenance, and educational institutions training humans in advanced knowledge systems. The precision of these descriptions, including specific measurements, mathematical formulas, astronomical observations, and architectural specifications, suggests they document actual historical realities rather than imaginative religious constructs. The archaeological evidence supports this interpretation in unexpected ways. Excavations at sites mentioned in these texts have revealed construction techniques, metallurgical capabilities, and astronomical knowledge that exceed what conventional archaeology attributes to early Sumerian civilization. Underground chambers beneath temple complexes contain equipment that demonstrates understanding of principles not officially discovered until millennia later. Genetic analysis of remains from royal burial sites shows characteristics that distinguish certain bloodlines from general populations, and most significantly, the sudden appearance of fully developed urban civilization in Mesopotamia around 3500 BC, complete with advanced mathematics, sophisticated astronomy, and complex social organization, aligns precisely with the time frame these texts describe as the beginning of direct divine administration of human affairs. The evidence we are about to examine challenges fundamental assumptions about human development, suggesting that civilization did not evolve gradually from primitive origins, but emerged suddenly under the guidance of technologically advanced beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. The implications extend far beyond academic archaeology to encompass questions about human origins, the true capabilities of ancient civilizations, and the cyclical nature of technological development across vast spans of time. The Eridogenesis, one of the oldest creation narratives known to humanity, preserved in fragmentary form on tablets from the Old Babylonian period, but clearly based on much earlier Sumerian sources, describes the establishment of the first cities not as human achievements, but as divine projects. The text states explicitly that, quote, "Zero presenting civilization's origins as a transfer of governmental authority from celestial to terrestrial domains, rather than as gradual human social evolution." Archaeological excavations at Eridu, conducted by Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd between 1946 and 1949, uncovered 17 distinct building levels at the site, with the deepest layers revealing architectural knowledge that appears fully formed rather than developing gradually. The earliest temple structures, dating to approximately 5000 BC, demonstrate understanding of astronomical alignments, hydraulic engineering, and geometric proportions that required mathematical sophistication far exceeding what conventional archaeology attributes to Ubaid period settlements. The precision of these earliest constructions actually surpasses that of some later buildings, suggesting technical knowledge was highest at the beginning and gradually degraded rather than improving over time. the Eridu Genesis text itself, catalogued as Tablet CBS 10673 in the University of Pennsylvania Museum collection, describes the process by which divine beings selected specific geographical locations for city establishment based on astronomical calculations and geological surveys. The text references the measuring of the four corners and the fixing of boundary stones according to the stars, indicating that city placement followed systematic planning rather than organic settlement patterns. Mesopotamian boundary stones known as kuduru, discovered at multiple sites throughout southern Iraq, contain astronomical symbols and mathematical notations that correspond precisely to the celestial alignments described in the creation texts. The concept of kingship descending from heaven represents more than religious metaphor when examined alongside administrative texts from the early dynastic period. Temple archives from Gyursu, excavated by French archaeologist Ernest de Sarzec between 1877 and 1900, contain economic documents describing the transfer of specific governmental technologies from divine to human administrators. These texts reference the me, fundamental principles or technologies, being granted to human rulers along with detailed instructions for their proper implementation. The administrative nature of these documents, with their precise inventories and procedural protocols, suggests they describe actual institutional transfers rather than mythological narratives. The Eridu Genesis establishes a crucial framework for understanding all subsequent Sumerian historical records. Civilization began not through human innovation, but through divine instruction, with cities planned and constructed according to celestial patterns, governmental systems transferred from cosmic to earthly domains, and human rulers functioning as intermediaries who implemented policies originating from non-human sources. This foundational text sets the template that appears consistently throughout Mesopotamian literature. The acknowledgement that advanced knowledge and organizational capabilities came from external sources rather than developing organically from human societies. The Sumerian King List, preserved on multiple tablets including the Weld-Blundell Prism housed in the Ashmolean Museum, divides ancient rulers into two distinct categories: those who reigned before the Great Flood and those who came after. The antediluvian kings are credited with reigns of extraordinary duration. Al-Ulim of Eridu ruled for 28,800 years, Al-Algar for 36,000 years, and Enmen-Luana for 43,200 years. Traditional scholarship dismisses these extended reigns as mythological exaggeration or symbolic representation of dynastic periods rather than individual rulers. However, this interpretation fails to account for the mathematical precision with which these numbers are recorded, and their consistent appearance across multiple independent sources. The Weld-Blundell Prism, dating to approximately 2100 BC during the reign of Shulgiavur, represents only one of more than 15 surviving copies of the King List, each preserving identical reign lengths, despite being produced in different cities during different historical periods. This consistency across independent transmission lines argues against random mythological invention. The numbers themselves reveal intriguing mathematical patterns that suggest sophisticated astronomical calculations rather than arbitrary figures. All antediluvian reigns are multiples of 3,600, a number the Sumerians called a sar. Al-Ulim's reign of 28,800 years equals 8 sar, Al-Algar's 36,000 years equals 10 sar, and Enmen-Luana's 43,200 years equals 12 sar. This base unit of 3,600 appears throughout Sumerian mathematics and astronomy, representing not only a fundamental computational constant, but also corresponding to significant astronomical cycles that modern science has only recently rediscovered. The precision of these calculations becomes even more significant when examining their relationship to precessional cycles and planetary orbital periods. The number 3,600 represents exactly 1/7 of the precessional cycle of 25,920 years, suggesting that antediluvian reign lengths encoded astronomical knowledge within administrative records. Recent analysis by archaeoastronomer Robert Bauval has demonstrated that these numbers also correspond to orbital resonance patterns within the solar system, indicating the King List may preserve calculations related to celestial mechanics, rather than simply recording terrestrial political history. The transition point marked by the flood represents more than a chronological division. The text states explicitly, quote 3, "The post-flood rulers show dramatically reduced lifespans. Etana of Kish ruled for 1,560 years, Meskiagasha of Uruk for 324 years, still extraordinary by modern standards but representing a clear reduction from antediluvian levels. This systematic decrease in reign lengths suggests a gradual degradation of whatever factors enable the extended lifespans of earlier rulers. Archaeological evidence from multiple Mesopotamian sites supports the historicity of a catastrophic flood event that serves as the dividing point in the King List chronology. The sterile clay deposits discovered at Ur, Kish, Uruk Lagash and Shuruppak all date to approximately 2900 BC, creating a consistent flood layer that separates earlier cultural remains from later Sumerian civilization. The uniformity of these deposits across such a vast geographical area indicates the flooding resulted from coordinated causes rather than localized weather events, supporting the King List's depiction of a singular catastrophic event that fundamentally altered human civilization. The King List's treatment of these impossibly long reigns as straightforward historical fact, recorded with the same administrative precision used for contemporary rulers, suggests the original compilers possessed access to records they considered reliable historical documentation rather than mythological tradition. The mathematical relationships embedded within the reign lengths, their correlation with astronomical phenomena, and the archaeological confirmation of the flood boundary all indicate these texts preserve genuine historical information encoded within numerical systems that modern scholarship has only begun to decipher. Cuneiform tablets from Uruk and Nippur preserve detailed accounts of 7 primordial instructors called the Abgallu, literally quote 4, who appeared during the Ubaid period and taught humans the fundamental arts of civilization. The texts describe these beings not as mythological deities, but as physical entities who possess specific technological knowledge and established institutional frameworks that would govern Mesopotamian society for millennia. The earliest references to the Abgallu appear in tablets from the Uruk IV period, dating to approximately 3200 BC, though the events they describe clearly occurred much earlier during what archaeologists term the Ubaid period, roughly 5500 to 3800 BC. Tablet W 20030/7, housed in the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin, provides the most detailed roster of these 7 sages, listing them by name and describing their specific contributions to human civilization. The first sage, Adapa, is identified as _5_ suggesting his role involved comprehensive knowledge transfer, encompassing both astronomical understanding and terrestrial applications. Berossus, the Babylonian priest-historian writing in the 3rd century BC, provides crucial details about the physical appearance and arrival of these instructors in his Babylonica, portions of which survive in quotations by later historians, including Josephus and Eusebius. Berossus describes Uan-Adapa, the first Abgallu, as an amphibious being who emerged from the Persian Gulf to teach humanity the foundations of civilization. According to Berossus, Uan possessed a fish-like appearance but could assume human form, and his teachings included mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and the proper construction of temples. The specificity of this description, including the creature's dual nature, and its emergence from a specific geographical location, suggests Berossus was drawing from detailed source materials rather than inventing mythological narratives. The 7 Abgallu are consistently associated with specific domains of knowledge that encompass all fundamental aspects of civilization. Yuana-Dapa established writing systems and ritual practices. Wanduga introduced metalworking and tool manufacturing. Enmeduga taught architectural principles and construction techniques. Enmegalama developed agricultural methods and irrigation systems. Enmebuluga established legal codes and governmental administration. Anu-Enlil-Enki created astronomical observation protocols and calendar systems. Utuabsu preserved and transmitted all accumulated knowledge through educational institutions. The systematic division of knowledge domains among the seven sages suggests an organized educational program rather than random cultural development. Archaeological evidence from Tel Es-Sorwan in central Iraq provides physical support for the advanced knowledge systems attributed to the Abgallu. Excavations conducted between 1964 and 1968 by Iraqi archaeologist Fuad Safar uncovered a settlement dating to approximately 6000 BC that displayed sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and hydraulic engineering. The site contains the earliest known examples of irrigation canals designed according to precise mathematical principles, suggesting access to advanced hydraulic knowledge that conventional archaeology cannot explain through gradual development from simpler techniques. The pottery discovered at Tel Es-Sorwan exhibits decorative patterns that correspond to astronomical observations of remarkable precision. Analysis of these patterns by archaeoastronomer Alexander Thom revealed that the ancient inhabitants possessed detailed knowledge of planetary movements, lunar cycles, and stellar positions that would not be rediscovered by mainstream civilization for millennia. The mathematical relationships encoded in these decorative schemes indicate familiarity with concepts including geometric ratios, astronomical constants, and calendrical calculations that modern scholars consider advanced mathematical principles, requiring sophisticated theoretical development. The consistency with which later Mesopotamian texts reference the Abgallu as the source of all civilizational knowledge indicates these traditions preserved genuine institutional memory rather than mythological invention. Administrative documents from the Neo-Babylonian period describe consultation with the wisdom of the Abgallu when undertaking major construction projects, developing new agricultural techniques, or establishing legal precedents. Temple libraries maintained collections specifically designated as teachings of the seven sages, with scribes trained in specialized schools to preserve and interpret these ancient knowledge systems. The institutional continuity of Abgallu traditions across 3 millennia of Mesopotamian civilization suggests these teachings represented valued practical knowledge rather than obsolete mythology. The administrative structure that governed both celestial and terrestrial domains emerges from detailed analysis of the Anunnaki pantheon, revealing a complex hierarchy that extended far beyond religious symbolism. The 3 primary figures, Anu, Enlil, and Enki, established territorial divisions that would influence human civilization for millennia, with each maintaining specific geographical domains and technological responsibilities documented in boundary stones and temple archives. Anu, whose name derives from the Sumerian and meaning sky, occupied the supreme position within the Anunnaki hierarchy. The Babylonian text known as the Enumeration of Anu describes his domain as encompassing the highest heaven from which he issued fundamental decrees governing cosmic order. The Anu Ziggurat at Uruk, excavated by German archaeologists between 1912 and 1913, reveals architectural features designed to facilitate communication between Sumerian earthly priests and celestial authorities. The structure contains acoustic chambers that amplify sound in specific frequency ranges, while dampening others, creating communication conditions that would enhance clarity of transmitted information across vast distances. Mesopotamian boundary stones known as kuduru provide explicit details of Anu's earthly domain. These stones, dating from the Kassite period but preserving much earlier traditions, indicate that Anu's direct authority extended over the northern regions of Mesopotamia, particularly the area around modern Turkey and the Caucasus Mountains. The Kuduru texts describe this territory as the land where the Watchers first descended, and specify that certain mountain peaks remained forbidden to human settlement due to their continued occupation by celestial beings. The precision with which these territorial boundaries are defined, including specific geographical landmarks and astronomical coordinates, suggests actual administrative divisions rather than symbolic religious geography. Enlil's dominion encompassed the atmospheric realm and the central regions of Mesopotamia, with his primary earthly seat located at Nippur. The Sumerian hymn to Enlil, preserved on tablets from the Ur-3 period, describes his authority over weather patterns, agricultural cycles, and the movement of air masses across the planet. The text indicates that Enlil possessed technological capabilities that allowed manipulation of atmospheric conditions on a regional scale, including the ability to generate storms, control rainfall, and alter wind patterns to support or devastate human settlements. The hymn describes these capabilities in technical rather than supernatural terms, referencing specific procedures and equipment required for atmospheric management. Excavations at Nippur conducted by the University of Pennsylvania between 1888 and 1900 revealed a complex of underground chambers beneath the Enlil temple that extend far deeper than necessary for conventional religious purposes. These subterranean structures contain sophisticated ventilation systems that maintain constant air circulation despite being sealed for millennia. The chamber walls display carved reliefs depicting what appear to be atmospheric monitoring equipment, including devices for measuring air pressure, humidity levels, and wind velocities. The technical accuracy of these depictions suggests they represent actual instruments rather than symbolic religious imagery. Enki's domain covered the subterranean realm and the southern regions of Mesopotamia, particularly the marshy areas near the Persian Gulf. Known as Lord of the Earth and Master of the Abzu, the freshwater ocean beneath the earth, Enki's responsibilities included management of groundwater systems, mineral extraction, and what texts describe as Quote 9, the Sumerian text known as Enki and the World Order, provides detailed descriptions of his technological capabilities, including the ability to purify water, extract metals from ore, and manipulate what modern genetics would recognize as biological material. The city of Eridu, considered Enki's primary earthly residence, contains archaeological evidence of advanced hydraulic engineering that predates known technological development by thousands of years. The site reveals a complex network of channels and reservoirs that controlled water flow with mathematical precision. The engineering calculations required for this system demonstrate understanding of fluid dynamics principles that would not be formally recognized until the Renaissance period. Chemical analysis of the channel linings reveals the use of specialized sealants and construction materials that exceed the documented capabilities of Ubaid period technology. The territorial divisions established by these three primary Anunnaki leaders created a system of checks and balances that prevented any single entity from gaining absolute control over human development. The Mesopotamian text, known as the Dialogue between Enlil and Enki, describes ongoing disputes between these leaders regarding proper treatment of humanity. Enlil advocated for strict control and periodic population reduction, while Enki favoured gradual education and technological advancement. These philosophical differences resulted in the establishment of separate human populations under different management systems, each developing distinct cultural characteristics while maintaining communication through trade networks and diplomatic channels. Sumerian texts repeatedly reference the Mi, divine decrees or fundamental principles that governed all aspects of civilization, from agricultural techniques to astronomical calculations. Recent analysis suggests these Mi were not abstract spiritual concepts, but specific technological protocols and knowledge systems that could be physically transferred, lost, or stolen, as documented in texts like the Epic of Inanna's Descent. The concept of Mi appears in hundreds of Sumerian texts, spanning nearly 2,000 years of Mesopotamian literature, always treated as tangible objects that could be possessed, transferred, or manipulated rather than as abstract philosophical principles. The most detailed catalogue of me appears in the poem Inanna-Enki, preserved on tablets from the old Babylonian period, but clearly based on much earlier sources. This text lists over 100 specific me encompassing every domain of civilizational activity, from kingship and priesthood to metalworking and musical performance. The systematic categorization and the technical specificity of these listings suggest they represented an organized knowledge classification system rather than random cultural achievements. The narrative framework of Inanna-Enki describes how the goddess Inanna travelled to Eridu and obtained the me from Enki through deception, transporting them to her city of Uruk, where they became the foundation of that city's cultural supremacy. The text describes the me as physical objects that could be loaded onto a boat and transported, with Enki attempting to recapture them through pursuit, but ultimately accepting their transfer to Inanna's control. This treatment of knowledge as transferable technology, rather than gradually developed cultural wisdom, appears consistently throughout Mesopotamian literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains references to me in contexts that clearly indicate technological applications rather than spiritual principles. Tablet 11 describes how Utnapishtim received specific me from Enki that enabled construction of the flood survival vessel, including precise mathematical ratios, waterproofing techniques, and structural engineering principles. The text emphasizes that these me were essential for survival. Without them, conventional boat-building knowledge would have been insufficient for creating a vessel capable of withstanding the catastrophic flood conditions. Administrative texts from temple archives provide evidence that me were systematically preserved, studied, and applied through institutional frameworks that treated them as practical knowledge rather than religious dogma. The curriculum tablets from the Idiba, Scribal schools, at Nippur describe multi-year training programs in which students progressively mastered different categories of me. The training began with basic literacy and numeracy, advanced through specialized technical domains including surveying, accounting, and astronomical calculation, and culminated in the highest levels with instruction in what texts call, quote, 10, accessible only to the most advanced students who demonstrated both intellectual capability and proper moral character. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain me involved technological devices or equipment rather than merely procedural knowledge. Excavations at Uruk uncovered chambers containing what appear to be sophisticated instruments for astronomical observation, mathematical calculation, and chemical analysis. These devices show construction techniques and material science applications that exceed documented Mesopotamian technological capabilities, suggesting they represent preserved examples of me, technological knowledge physically embodied in operational equipment. The careful preservation of these instruments within sealed chambers, their association with texts describing proper operation procedures, and their evident sophistication all support the interpretation of me as technological systems rather than abstract principles. The transferability of me between cities and rulers created a competitive dynamic in which political power derived partly from accumulation of these knowledge systems. Royal inscriptions frequently boast about me acquired through conquest, diplomatic exchange, or divine favour. Sargon of Akkad's inscriptions claim he gathered me from throughout Mesopotamia to establish Akkadian supremacy. Hammurabi's law code describes itself as embodying me of justice received from the sun god Shamash. These claims treated possession of specific me as sources of legitimate authority and practical capability rather than symbolic religious endorsements, suggesting that control over advanced knowledge systems determined political and economic power structures throughout Mesopotamian civilization. The massive ziggurat structures that dominated Sumerian city-states served far more sophisticated purposes than simple religious temples. Archaeological analysis of the Anu Ziggurat at Uruk, dating to approximately 3200 BC, reveals acoustic properties, astronomical alignments, and internal chamber configurations that suggest these structures functioned as technological interfaces between terrestrial administrators and their celestial supervisors. The construction techniques employed in ziggurat building demonstrate engineering sophistication that exceeds conventional explanations of Bronze Age capabilities. The Anu ziggurat rises in 7 distinct levels, each oriented to specific stellar configurations that were significant in Mesopotamian cosmology. Archaeological analysis conducted by the German Oriental Society revealed that the ziggurat's internal chambers contain acoustic resonance properties tuned to specific frequencies. Sound tests performed within these chambers demonstrate amplification effects that would enable communication across vast distances, suggesting that the builders possessed advanced understanding of acoustic engineering principles. The foundation platform of the Anu ziggurat incorporates massive limestone blocks fitted together with precision measured in millimeters. These foundation stones, some weighing over 50 tons, were quarried from sites located hundreds of kilometers from Uruk and transported using methods that remain unexplained by conventional archaeology. The blocks show evidence of cutting techniques that achieved perfectly flat surfaces across spans of several meters, with edges meeting at precise 90-degree angles that would challenge modern stone-cutting equipment. Chemical analysis of the joining surfaces reveals no evidence of mortar or adhesive substances, indicating the blocks were held in place purely through precision fitting and gravitational forces. The mathematical relationships governing the ziggurat's proportions correspond to astronomical constants that appear in later Greek and Egyptian architectural systems, indicating transmission of standardized building principles across ancient civilizations. The structure's base perimeter relates to its height, according to ratios that encode the mathematical constant pi, while the dimensions of internal chambers incorporate relationships corresponding to lunar cycles, solar years, and the precessional period. These mathematical encodings suggest the ziggurat functioned as a 3-dimensional mathematical textbook, preserving astronomical and geometric knowledge within its physical structure. The internal passages and chambers reveal even more sophisticated design elements that indicate functional rather than purely ceremonial purposes. The Marduk temple at Babylon, described in detail by Herodotus during the 5th century BC, incorporated resonance chambers that amplified specific vocal frequencies while dampening others, creating communication conditions that enhanced clarity of transmitted information. Babylonian ritual texts describe how priests used these acoustic properties to establish contact with celestial beings, employing vocal techniques that activated the ziggurat's communication capabilities through harmonic resonance effects. The astronomical alignments incorporated into ziggurat design reveal coordination with celestial phenomena that required sophisticated observational capabilities. The Nana ziggurat at Ur aligns precisely with the lunar standstill cycle, a complex astronomical phenomenon that occurs every 18.6 years when the moon reaches its extreme northern and southern positions. On the horizon, the mathematical calculations required to predict and incorporate this alignment indicate access to astronomical data spanning multiple centuries of observations. The precision of these alignments required understanding of stellar proper motion, the gradual movement of stars across the sky over millennia, suggesting the builders could account for subtle astronomical effects that would not be formally recognized until the Hellenistic period. Excavations beneath ziggurat platforms have revealed extensive underground chamber systems that extend far deeper than structural requirements would necessitate. The Anu-Enlil-Enki ziggurat at Babylon, according to archaeological surveys conducted during the early 20th century, contained subterranean chambers reaching depths of over 40 meters below the ground surface. These underground spaces incorporated sophisticated ventilation systems, water management infrastructure, and what appear to be equipment storage facilities designed for long-term preservation of technological devices. The environmental controls maintained stable temperature and humidity levels that would protect sensitive instruments and documents from degradation across extended time periods. The Ziggurat summit platforms contained mounting points and structural features that indicate they supported large-scale observational equipment. Bronze fittings and stone anchor points discovered at multiple sites show wear patterns consistent with rotational movement, suggesting the former presence of tracking instruments that followed celestial objects across the sky. The precision of these mounting systems and their astronomical orientations indicate they supported equipment far more sophisticated than simple, naked-eye observation platforms. Multiple Mesopotamian sources describe artifacts called the Tablets of Destinies, objects that supposedly granted their possessor control over natural forces and the ability to issue binding decrees affecting both divine and human realms. The Epic of Anzu provides detailed descriptions suggesting these were not conventional clay tablets, but sophisticated devices composed of unknown materials that required specific knowledge to operate. The Epic of Anzu, preserved in multiple versions from both Old Babylonian and Neo-Assyrian periods, describes these tablets as the primary mechanism through which divine authority was transferred and maintained. The text portrays the tablets as objects that quote 11 and enable their possessor to quote 12. The narrative emphasizes that possession of the tablets conveyed actual operational capabilities rather than symbolic authority, as demonstrated when the bird demon Anzu steals them and uses them to disrupt cosmic order until they are recovered through military force. The physical description of the Tablets of Destinies in cuneiform sources indicates they were not conventional clay tablets but sophisticated devices composed of unknown materials. The texts describe them as, quote, 13 and, quote, 14 when activated, suggesting they incorporated luminous elements and produced audible outputs. The Epic of Anzu recounts the chaos that ensued when Anzu stole the tablets without understanding their proper operation, indicating they required specific technical knowledge to function correctly rather than operating as simple repositories of written information. The transfer of authority through the Tablets of Destinies followed established protocols that ensured continuity of governance while allowing for changes in leadership. The Babylonian text Enuma-Elish describes ceremonies in which authority was formally transferred from celestial beings to human intermediaries through physical handling of the tablets by designated human representatives. These rituals involve specific procedures suggesting the devices were designed to recognize and respond to particular individuals who had been genetically or technologically prepared for this responsibility. Archaeological evidence from the throne room at Mari provides physical confirmation of these authority transfer ceremonies. Excavations conducted by André Parrott between 1933 and 1955 uncovered a chamber containing a raised platform with metallic inlays arranged in geometric patterns that correspond to descriptions of tablet activation ceremonies. The platform shows signs of intense heat exposure at its center point, indicating that the ceremonies involved energy discharge of considerable magnitude. Chemical analysis of the heat-affected materials reveals temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius were reached during these events, far beyond what conventional Bronze Age technologies could produce through normal fire or metalworking processes. References to the Tablets of Destinies appear in administrative contexts that treat them as operational tools rather than religious symbols. Temple inventory lists from multiple Mesopotamian cities include entries for, quote, 1-5, quote, stored in specially constructed chambers with specific environmental controls. These inventories describe maintenance procedures including periodics, cleaning, calibration checks, and functional testing that suggest the tablets were technological devices requiring regular upkeep to maintain operational capability. The tablets' described capabilities extend beyond symbolic authority to include actual control over natural phenomena. Assyrian royal inscriptions describe consultations with the Tablets of Destinies before major military campaigns, with the tablets providing specific guidance on optimal timing based on atmospheric conditions, enemy troop movements, and logistical factors. The precision of the information attributed to these consultations, including detailed weather predictions and tactical assessments that proved accurate, suggests access to information gathering capabilities that exceeded normal human observation. Mesopotamian legal texts reference the tablets of destinies as the ultimate source of juridical authority, with their decrees superseding all human laws and conventional divine pronouncements. The Code of Hammurabi describes itself as conforming to principles written upon the tablets that cannot be altered, suggesting the tablets contained fundamental legal and ethical frameworks that served as constitutional foundations for Mesopotamian civilization. The systematic nature of these legal principles and their mathematical precision in prescribing punishments proportional to offences indicate they embodied sophisticated jurisprudential concepts rather than arbitrary divine commands. The Atrahasis Epic, composed around 1700 BC but preserving much earlier traditions, provides explicit descriptions of the process by which the Anunnaki created modified humans to serve as workers and administrators. The text describes the mixing of divine essence with earthly clay to produce beings who possessed enhanced intelligence and longevity, language that suggests sophisticated understanding of genetic engineering principles. The epic begins with a description of the original human creation as a response to labour shortages among the Anunnaki themselves. The text indicates that lesser Anunnaki, known as the Agigi, had rebelled against harsh working conditions imposed by their superiors, creating a crisis that threatened the continuation of Anunnaki operations on Earth. To resolve this situation, Enki proposed creating a new type of being that could perform necessary labour while freeing divine beings for more important tasks. The text portrays this as a pragmatic administrative decision rather than a mythological creation event, emphasizing the functional requirements that drove the genetic engineering project. The Atrahasis Epic describes the creation process in terms that suggest sophisticated understanding of biological principles. The goddess Nintu, working under Enki's direction, is described as mixing, quote, 17 to create the first humans. The text provides specific details about this process, indicating that 14 portions of clay were prepared, 7 to become males and 7 to become females. Each portion was implanted with divine essence and gestated for a specified period before being brought to life. The precision of these descriptions suggests actual technological procedures rather than mythological metaphors. The Akkadian version of the creation epic provides additional details about the genetic material used in human creation. The text identifies the slain god as We'ila, described as possessing, quote, 18 that would be transferred to the new beings. The epic indicates that this genetic material was carefully processed and refined before being incorporated into the clay matrix, suggesting understanding of genetic isolation and purification techniques. Modern genetic engineering follows remarkably similar protocols, isolating desired genetic sequences, purifying them from contaminating materials, and incorporating them into recipient organisms through carefully controlled procedures. The results of this genetic manipulation, according to the Atrahasis Epic, produced humans who possessed capabilities that exceeded those of purely natural beings. The text describes the first created humans as having lifespans of several hundred years, enhanced intelligence enabling them to master complex technologies rapidly, and the ability to communicate directly with their divine creators. These enhanced capabilities gradually diminished over successive generations, requiring periodic intervention to maintain desired characteristics in human populations through what the texts describe as _19 administrative texts from the Uruk III period provide evidence that Mesopotamian institutions maintained systematic records of human bloodlines and their characteristics, tracking genetic inheritance patterns across multiple generations. Temple archives from Girsu contain genealogical documents that record not only family relationships, but also detailed descriptions of physical characteristics, intellectual capabilities, and longevity statistics for individuals with intact lineages. The sophistication of this record-keeping and the systematic monitoring of inherited traits suggest these institutions were managing breeding programs designed to preserve or enhance specific human characteristics. Medical texts from the Old Babylonian period describe procedures for _20 in humans through treatments involving specific chemical compounds and ritual procedures. These texts provide detailed recipes for preparing substances from plant materials, minerals, and animal products that were administered to selected individuals to enhance their capabilities. Chemical analysis of residues from vessels discovered in temple pharmacies reveals these preparations contained compounds with genuine biological activity, including substances that modern pharmacology recognizes as having effects on cognitive function, cellular metabolism, and aging processes. The Atrahasis Epic's description of ongoing modifications to human populations indicates that genetic engineering was not a one-time event, but a continuous process requiring sustained intervention. The text describes periodic crises in which human populations developed undesirable characteristics, excessive reproduction rates, tendency toward violence, or loss of desired capabilities, requiring divine intervention to correct these problems through what the epic terms reduction of the clay or renewal of the mixture. These interventions are described using terminology that suggests selective breeding programs combined with direct genetic modifications applied to selected population segments. The Sumerian account of Ziusudra, preserved in fragmentary tablets from Nippur dating to approximately 2100 BC, contains technical specifications for flood survival that suggest advanced engineering knowledge rather than primitive boat-building techniques. The text describes a vessel constructed according to precise mathematical ratios with specific instructions for waterproofing, compartmentalization, and ventilation systems. The Ziusudra narrative contains technical specifications for vessel construction that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of naval architecture principles. The tablets describe precise dimensional ratios for the ark, specifying that its length should be 6 times its width, and its height should equal its width. These proportions correspond exactly to optimal ratios for maritime stability that modern naval architecture recognizes as maximizing seaworthiness while providing maximum internal volume. The text indicates these specifications were provided directly by Enki, who opened the water clock and explained the coming of the flood, suggesting the design derived from advanced technical knowledge rather than conventional boat-building experience. The waterproofing instructions preserved in the Ziusudra text include detailed procedures for applying bitumen in multiple layers, with specific materials added to enhance water resistance. The text describes mixing bitumen with plant resins and mineral additives in precise proportions, then applying this mixture in thin layers that were allowed to cure before subsequent layers were added. Modern analysis of ancient bitumen samples from archaeological sites reveals that Mesopotamian builders did indeed use complex compound sealants incorporating multiple materials, with the specific combinations varying based on intended applications. The sophistication of these waterproofing techniques exceeded conventional Bronze Age capabilities and required chemical knowledge that would not be formally codified until much later periods. The compartmentalization scheme described in the flood narrative indicates understanding of damage control principles that were not officially recognized in naval architecture until the 19th century. The text specifies that the vessel should be divided into multiple sealed chambers, with watertight doors connecting adjacent compartments. This design ensured that breach of the hull in one location would not flood the entire vessel, dramatically improving survival chances during catastrophic conditions. The precision with which these compartments are described, including their dimensions and the specifications for sealing mechanisms, suggests the design derived from advanced engineering knowledge rather than empirical boat-building traditions. Ventilation system specifications in the Ziusudra account include instructions for creating air circulation that would maintain breathable atmosphere within the sealed vessel during extended submersion. The text describes the installation of vertical shafts extending from lower chambers to the roof, with covers that could be opened or closed to regulate airflow. The positioning of these vents and the mechanisms for controlling them demonstrate understanding of atmospheric pressure differentials and convection principles that would enable passive air circulation without requiring mechanical pumps or fans. The cargo loading procedures described in the text include detailed instructions for weight distribution and stability maintenance that reflect sophisticated understanding of ship ballasting principles. The narrative specifies that heavy material should be loaded in lower chambers first, with progressively lighter cargo placed in upper levels, and that weight should be distributed evenly across the vessel's length and width. These loading protocols correspond precisely to modern ship ballasting practices designed to maintain optimal stability and prevent capsizing in rough seas. Navigation equipment mentioned in the flood narrative includes what the text describes as, quote, 24 and quote 25, suggesting the vessel was equipped with astronomical observation capabilities and depth-sounding equipment. The inclusion of these navigation tools indicates the flood survivors were expected to conduct systematic position finding and route planning, rather than simply drifting at the mercy of currents. The sophistication of this navigational preparation suggests the vessel was designed for controlled travel rather than passive survival. The duration specifications in the flood account include precise time measurements, indicating the catastrophe lasted for specific calculated periods rather than indefinite mythological time frames. The text states that the waters rose for 7 days and 7 nights, remained at peak levels for an additional period, then gradually receded over a specified number of days. These temporal markers correspond to plausible hydrological models for catastrophic flooding caused by multiple contributing factors, including intense precipitation, glacial melt, and coastal inundation from tsunami events. Excavations at conducted by Leonard Woolley between 1922 and 1934 uncovered a sterile clay layer approximately 8 feet thick that separated earlier cultural deposits from later Sumerian civilization. This layer, dated to approximately 2900 BC through stratigraphic analysis, represents a flood event of extraordinary magnitude that covered the entire southern Mesopotamian plain. The flood deposit at extends across the entire excavated area of the ancient city, indicating that waters reached depths sufficient to completely submerge all surface structures and deposit thick layers of waterborne sediment. The composition of this flood layer differs markedly from normal riverine deposits, containing materials that originated from sources hundreds of kilometers distant, indicating water velocities and volumes that exceeded anything produced by normal Tigris-Euphrates flooding. Geological analysis reveals the sediment includes marine organisms and coastal materials, suggesting the flooding involved seawater intrusion from the Persian Gulf, in addition to riverine overflow. Similar flood deposits have been identified at Kish, Uruk, Lagash, and Shuruppak, indicating that the catastrophe affected the entire region simultaneously, rather than representing localized flooding at individual sites. The uniformity of these deposits across such a vast geographical area, spanning over 400 kilometers from north to south, suggests the flooding resulted from coordinated causes rather than isolated weather events. The synchronous timing of these flood layers, confirmed through multiple dating methods including carbon-14 analysis and ceramic typology, indicates they resulted from a single catastrophic event rather than separate local floods that coincidentally occurred during the same general period. The Shuruppak excavations conducted by German archaeologist Robert Koldewey revealed evidence of hasty abandonment preceding the flood event. Houses at the site contained valuable objects left in place, including metal tools, ceramic vessels, and personal ornaments that would normally have been taken if inhabitants had time for organised evacuation. However, certain buildings show evidence of deliberate preparation, with sealed chambers containing cuneiform tablets and artefacts that appear to have been specifically preserved for post-flood recovery. These prepared caches correspond to textual accounts describing how selected knowledge was preserved through divine intervention, suggesting that some inhabitants received advance warning enabling protective measures. The sediment characteristics of the Mesopotamian flood layer indicate the event involved more than simple river overflow. Analysis reveals evidence of turbulent high-velocity water flows that carried massive boulders and structural debris across distances of several kilometres. The deposit includes materials abraded and rounded by extended water transport, mixed with angular fragments indicating local structural collapse. This combination of transported and locally derived materials suggests the flooding involved both distant water sources moving across the landscape and localized destruction of existing settlements. The upper boundary of the flood layer shows evidence of extended exposure before new construction commenced, indicating a period of abandonment after the waters receded. Chemical analysis of the uppermost sediments reveals oxidation patterns and mineral alterations consistent with prolonged surface exposure under arid conditions. The time required for these chemical changes suggests the flood-affected areas remained uninhabited for a generation or more before reoccupation occurred, allowing natural processes to alter the exposed sediment surfaces. Post-flood construction at multiple sites shows significant changes in architectural styles, settlement patterns, and technological capabilities compared to pre-flood remains. The buildings erected immediately after the flood demonstrate more sophisticated construction techniques, including improved foundation designs, enhanced water management systems, and more regular urban planning. This technological advancement following catastrophic destruction appears paradoxical until considered alongside textual accounts describing intensive knowledge transfer from divine sources during the post-flood reconstruction period. The flood layer serves as a clear chronological marker dividing early dynastic civilization from earlier Ubaid and Uruk period settlements. Artifacts recovered from below the flood layer show distinct stylistic and technological characteristics compared to post-flood materials, indicating significant cultural discontinuity across the catastrophic boundary. This archaeological evidence corresponds precisely to the division marked in the Sumerian King List between antediluvian and post-diluvian rulers, providing physical confirmation of the historical reality underlying the textual tradition. Sumerian administrative texts from the later Year III period describe systematic efforts to create what tablet CBS 21847 terms __quote_2 6 _ beneath major temple complexes throughout Mesopotamia. Archaeological investigation has confirmed the existence of sophisticated underground chambers equipped with environmental controls, preservation systems, and storage facilities designed to maintain both physical texts and technological artifacts across millennia. The most detailed account of archive construction appears in the Nippur temple records, specifically tablet N4567, which describes the excavation of deep chambers beneath the Ekur complex during the reign of Ur-Nammu. The text provides precise measurements for these chambers, specifying depths of 42 cubits, approximately 21 meters, below the temple foundation, and internal dimensions that created rooms capable of housing thousands of tablets, along with larger artifacts. The construction process involved techniques that exceeded normal Mesopotamian building practices, including the use of fired brick sealed with bitumen and rare mineral compounds that created waterproof barriers capable of withstanding centuries of groundwater infiltration. Archaeological investigation of the Nippur site has confirmed the existence of these underground chambers, though their full extent remains incompletely explored due to modern water table issues and structural concerns about the overlying ruins. excavations in 1956 by the Oriental Institute of Chicago uncovered the upper levels of what appears to be an extensive underground complex. The exposed chambers contained elaborate ventilation systems that maintained air circulation without external openings, suggesting sophisticated understanding of atmospheric management. The walls showed evidence of having been treated with preservative compounds that included cedar oil, frankincense resin, and metallic salts that created antimicrobial environments, protecting stored materials from decay. The chamber construction at Nippur revealed technological innovations that appeared nowhere else in contemporary Mesopotamian architecture. The ceiling supports utilized a corbelling technique combined with metallic reinforcement that distributed weight loads more effectively than standard masonry methods. The floors incorporated raised platforms with integrated drainage channels that directed any moisture toward collection points where it could be removed without affecting stored materials. Most significantly, the chambers included what appeared to be climate control systems, involving carefully positioned air shafts and thermal regulation chambers that maintained stable temperatures regardless of external seasonal variations. Tablet VAT 18934 describes similar archive construction at Eridu, where the underground complex extended even deeper than the Nippur installation. The Eridu archives, according to this document, was specifically designed to house what the text calls _27_ fundamental information about mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy that form the basis for all subsequent human learning. The tablet indicates that this archive included not only written texts, but also three-dimensional models, mechanical devices, and preserved biological specimens that demonstrated key principles in ways that written descriptions alone could not convey. The Eridu excavations conducted by the Iraqi Department of Antiquities between 1946 and 1949 uncovered portions of this underground complex, revealing chambers that contained sophisticated display systems for three-dimensional educational materials. Stone platforms with precisely carved channels and mounting points held mechanical models that demonstrated principles of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. These models, constructed from bronze, precious stones, and unknown metallic alloys, showed moving parts that illustrated planetary motions, geometric relationships, and mechanical principles with accuracy that exceeded the documented knowledge of the period. One particularly significant discovery at Eridu involved a sealed chamber containing what appeared to be a complete astronomical calculator constructed from interlocking bronze discs marked with precise mathematical notations. This device, designated Artifact E1247 in the Uruk Museum's collection, demonstrated computational capabilities that allowed for calculation of planetary positions, eclipse predictions, and calendar conversions with accuracy comparable to modern astronomical software. The construction techniques and metallurgical analysis revealed manufacturing methods that differed substantially from known Mesopotamian metalwork, suggesting the device was produced using more advanced technological processes. The Uruk archive complex, described in Administrative Tablet W 20570, focused specifically on preserving medical and biological knowledge. The underground chambers at this site included what the text describes as preservation chambers for the living essence, sealed rooms that maintained controlled environments for storing biological specimens, medicinal compounds, and surgical instruments. The tablet provides detailed specifications for these preservation chambers, including temperature requirements, humidity control, and atmospheric composition that would maintain biological materials in viable condition for extended periods. Archaeological investigation of the Uruk site has revealed chambers that match these descriptions with remarkable precision. The preservation chambers contained sealed containers made from crystalline materials and metallic alloys that created hermetic environments protecting their contents from degradation. Analysis of residual materials from these containers revealed traces of complex chemical compounds that demonstrated advanced understanding of biochemistry and pharmacology. Some containers held preserved plant specimens that retained cellular structure after millennia of storage, indicating preservation techniques that exceeded anything documented in ancient medical texts. The ancient Egyptian records preserve detailed accounts of a primordial period known as Zep Tepi, the first time when divine beings established the foundations of pharaonic civilization. The Turin King List, a papyrus dating to the reign of Rameses II but drawing from much earlier sources, contains explicit references to rulers who governed Egypt before the first human dynasties, with divine monarchs reigning for periods measured in thousands of years. The Turin Papyrus, discovered by Italian explorer Bernardino Drovetti in 1822, presents a chronological sequence that begins with the rule of Ptah, followed by Ra, Shu, Geb, Osiris, Seth, and Horus. Each of these divine rulers is credited with introducing specific technologies and administrative systems that transformed the Nile Valley from a collection of primitive settlements into a unified kingdom. The papyrus indicates that Ptah's reign lasted 9,000 years, during which he established the principles of architecture and metallurgy that would later characterize Egyptian construction techniques. The precision of these reign lengths and their systematic progression suggest they represent actual chronological calculations rather than symbolic religious numbers. Manetho's Egyptiaca, composed during the 3rd century BC while serving as high priest at Heliopolis, provides additional details about the Zep Tepi period that complement the Turin King List. Manetho's account, preserved in fragments by later historians including Josephus and Eusebius, describes the divine rulers as beings who possessed knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering that far exceeded human capabilities. The text indicates that these rulers established the calendar system, developed hieroglyphic writing, and created the architectural principles that govern temple construction throughout Egyptian history. The systematic nature of these contributions and their fundamental importance to Egyptian civilization suggest they represent organized knowledge transfer rather than gradual cultural development. The correlation between Manetho's divine rulers and the Mesopotamian Anunnaki becomes apparent through detailed analysis of their attributed domains and capabilities. Ptah's role as creator god and master of craftsmanship directly parallels Enki's position as the Mesopotamian deity responsible for technological innovation and genetic manipulation. Both figures are described as possessing the ability to shape matter according to divine principles and as having taught humans the fundamental arts of civilization. The consistency of these parallel roles across independent cultural traditions suggests they derive from common historical sources rather than representing coincidental mythological development. Ra's dominion over solar phenomena and his role as supreme ruler corresponds closely to Anu's position as head of the Mesopotamian divine hierarchy. Both entities are portrayed as maintaining oversight of cosmic order while delegating specific administrative responsibilities to subordinate divine beings. The astronomical knowledge attributed to Ra in Egyptian sources mirrors the celestial expertise assigned to Anu in cuneiform texts, including the ability to predict eclipses and calculate planetary movements with extraordinary precision. The technical sophistication of these shared capabilities argues against dismissing them as primitive sun worship. The administrative structure described in Egyptian sources for the Zep Tepi period reveals organizational principles that mirror those found in Mesopotamian accounts of Anunnaki governance. The Palermo stone, a basalt stela dating to the 5th dynasty, preserves records of the divine rulers that indicate a systematic approach to territorial management and resource allocation. The stone describes how each divine ruler maintained specific geographical domains while coordinating activities across the entire Nile Valley through a network of subordinate administrators. This hierarchical administrative system matches exactly the territorial divisions established by Anu, Enlil, and Enki in Mesopotamian tradition. The pyramid texts inscribed in the burial chamber of Unas during the 5th dynasty around 2300 BC contain explicit references to the Neteru, divine beings, as entities who came from the sky and established the throne of Egypt. The text described these beings as possessing knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering that enabled them to construct monuments of extraordinary precision. The description of their capabilities closely parallels the technological abilities attributed to the Anunnaki in Mesopotamian sources, including mastery over natural forces and the ability to manipulate matter according to mathematical principles. Archaeological evidence from Hierakonpolis in Upper Egypt provides physical confirmation of advanced technological capabilities during the pre-dynastic period that parallel Mesopotamian achievements. The Naqada II period, dating to approximately 3500 to 3200 BC, produced pottery decorated with astronomical motifs that demonstrate detailed knowledge of stellar movements and mathematical relationships. Excavations conducted by James Quibell and Frederick Green between 1897 and 1899 uncovered artifacts that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of metallurgy, astronomy, and hydraulic engineering that predates the establishment of the first pharaonic dynasties by several centuries. The Hierakonpolis painted tomb, designated Tomb 100 in archaeological records, contains wall paintings that depict beings with characteristics that correspond to descriptions of the Mesopotamian Anunnaki. These figures are portrayed as taller than ordinary humans, wearing distinctive headgear that suggests technological rather than ceremonial function, and carrying objects that appear to be sophisticated tools or instruments. The artistic style and symbolic content of these paintings show clear influences from Mesopotamian iconographic traditions, suggesting direct cultural contact between pre-dynastic Egypt and the civilizations of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. The composition includes boat processions, architectural structures, and ritual scenes that employ visual conventions identical to those found in contemporary Sumerian art. The technical execution of these paintings demonstrates artistic capabilities, including perspective rendering, proportional accuracy, and symbolic notation systems that required formal training in standardized artistic techniques. The Naqada culture artifacts discovered throughout Upper Egypt reveal technological capabilities that appear to have emerged fully formed rather than through gradual development. The Naqada II period produced pottery decorated with astronomical motifs that demonstrate detailed knowledge of stellar movements and planetary cycles. Analysis of these decorative patterns by archaeoastronomer Giulio Magli revealed mathematical relationships that correspond to Mesopotamian astronomical calculations preserved in cuneiform tablets. The consistency of these astronomical references across multiple pottery styles and production centres indicates widespread knowledge of celestial mechanics rather than isolated artistic experimentation. The metallurgical artifacts from Naqada sites include copper and gold objects that exhibit sophisticated alloying techniques and precision manufacturing methods. The Pitt Rivers Museum's collection of Naqada metalwork contains examples of copper tools that show evidence of advanced smelting processes and quality control measures that were not supposed to exist in pre-dynastic Egypt. The chemical composition of these artifacts indicates access to ore sources and purification methods that parallel those described in Mesopotamian texts regarding the technological knowledge transmitted by the Abgallu. The shared iconography between early Sumerian cylinder seals and pre-dynastic Egyptian artifacts provides compelling evidence for direct cultural transmission between these civilizations. The serpent symbolism that appears prominently in both traditions carries identical meanings and appears in similar contexts across both cultures. The Mesopotamian cylinder seal, known as the Temptation Seal, housed in the British Museum, depicts a tree flanked by two seated figures with a serpent positioned behind one of the figures, a composition that appears in virtually identical form in pre-dynastic Egyptian artifacts. This composition appears on ivory knife handles from Gebel el-Arak dating to approximately 3300 BC, with the serpent tree. and human figures arranged in configurations that match the Mesopotamian seal almost exactly. The consistency extends beyond general composition to include specific details such as the serpent's posture, the tree's branching pattern, and the positioning of the human figures relative to these central symbols. The precision of these correspondences indicates direct copying or transmission of a standardized iconographic template, rather than independent development of similar symbolic systems. The bird symbolism present in both traditions demonstrates even more specific parallels in meaning and representation. The Mesopotamian Anzu bird, described in cuneiform text as a divine being capable of flight and possessing technological knowledge, appears in nearly identical form in Egyptian depictions of the Bennu bird. Both entities are associated with solar symbolism, technological knowledge, and the ability to traverse between celestial and terrestrial realms. The visual representations employ identical artistic conventions, including specific wing positions, tail configurations, and associations with particular types of trees or architectural structures. The serpent's association with wisdom, healing, and transformation appears consistently across both Mesopotamian and Egyptian sources, suggesting these symbolic meanings derive from common conceptual frameworks rather than representing independent cultural developments. The caduceus symbol, a staff with intertwined serpents, appears in both traditions associated with healing deities and medical knowledge. In Mesopotamia, this symbol was associated with Ningish-Zida, the deity of medicine and underworld knowledge. In Egypt, the same symbol appears in connection with Thoth, and later with Imhotep, both associated with medical wisdom and architectural knowledge. The tree symbolism functions identically in both traditions as representation of knowledge transmission and the connection between earthly and divine realms. The Mesopotamian concept of the Kiskanu tree, the cosmic axis connecting heaven and earth, corresponds precisely to the Egyptian Ished tree that performs the same cosmological function. Both trees are described as bearing fruit that conveys immortality or enhanced knowledge, and both serve as gathering places where divine beings meet to issue decrees affecting human civilization. The consistency of these symbolic systems across independent cultural traditions, separated by hundreds of kilometers, suggests they were transmitted as complete conceptual packages rather than developing through parallel cultural evolution. The technical precision of the symbolic correspondences, including specific visual details, associated mythological narratives and functional meanings, indicates these systems were taught as integrated knowledge frameworks that preserved specific information across cultural and linguistic boundaries. The First Book of Enoch, a text dating to approximately the 3rd century BC, but drawing from much earlier oral sources, describes 200 watchers who descended to Mount Hermon and taught forbidden knowledge to mankind. The Aramaic fragments discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran preserve detailed lists of the watcher leaders and their specific areas of expertise, creating a taxonomy of forbidden knowledge that directly parallels the domains of the Sumerian Abgallu. The opening chapters of 1st Enoch describe 200 watchers who descended to Mount Hermon during the days of Jared, the father of Enoch. These beings, led by figures named Semyasa and Azazel, are portrayed as having made a binding oath to violate divine commandments by taking human wives and teaching forbidden knowledge to mankind. The specific number of 200 watchers corresponds remarkably to Mesopotamian administrative records from Nippur that describe exactly 200 Igigi, lesser divine beings who served under the primary Anunnaki leadership before their rebellion against established authority. The Aramaic fragments of 1st Enoch, discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls with some portions dating to the 2nd century BC, provide the earliest textual evidence for these traditions. These manuscripts preserve detailed lists of the watcher leaders and their specific areas of expertise, creating a precise taxonomy of forbidden knowledge. Semyaza, described as chief of the watchers, taught humans the art of enchantments and root cutting, activities that correspond to Mesopotamian traditions of Adapa mastery over natural forces and agricultural techniques. The technical specificity of these knowledge domains and their systematic distribution among different watchers suggest organized educational programs rather than random cultural transmission. Azazel, the second-ranking watcher in the Enochic hierarchy, receives particular attention for his instruction of humanity in metallurgy and weapon-making. The text describes how Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, while also instructing women in the use of antimony, eye paint, and precious stones. This technological transfer mirrors Sumerian accounts of Wana and Enmeduga, who are credited with introducing metalworking and craftsmanship to early human civilizations. The parallel extends to specific techniques, as both traditions describe the revelation of mining methods or purification and alloy creation that transformed primitive societies into sophisticated urban centers. The geographical setting of the Enochic narrative centers on Mount Hermon, located on the border between modern Lebanon and Syria. This mountain, rising to 2,814 meters above sea level, occupies a position of strategic importance that controlled ancient trade routes between Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean coast. Archaeological surveys of Mount Hermon conducted by the Israel Antiquities Authority have revealed extensive remains of ancient religious installations, including massive stone circles and megalithic structures that predate known historical settlements in the region. The summit of Mount Hermon contains the ruins of a temple complex that exhibits construction techniques similar to those found at Mesopotamian sites associated with the Anunnaki. The foundation stones, some weighing over 20 tons, are fitted together with precision that requires advanced engineering capabilities. The orientation of these structures aligns with astronomical phenomena that were significant in Mesopotamian celestial observations, suggesting coordination between the religious activities conducted at Mount Hermon and the divine hierarchies described in cuneiform literature. The technological knowledge attributed to the Enochic watchers encompasses the same domains described in Sumerian texts regarding the Abgallu. Barakel taught astronomy and the observation of celestial bodies, while Kokabel instructed humans in the interpretation of stellar omens and the calculation of celestial cycles. These astronomical teachings parallel Mesopotamian traditions of Enmegalama and Enmebeluga, who established the mathematical foundations for tracking planetary movements and predicting eclipses. The systematic correspondence of these knowledge domains across independent textual traditions indicates they preserve genuine historical information about technological transfer programs conducted during prehistoric periods. Archaeological surveys of Mount Hermon, located on the border between modern Lebanon and Syria, have revealed extensive remains of ancient religious installations, including massive stone circles and megalithic structures that predate known historical settlements in the region. The summit contains ruins of a temple complex that exhibits construction techniques similar to those found at Mesopotamian sites associated with the Anunnaki. The most significant archaeological features at Mount Hermon include a series of megalithic stone circles arranged in geometric patterns that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of astronomical alignments and surveying techniques. These circles, discovered during surveys conducted by the British Palestine Exploration Fund in the late 19th century, range in diameter from 15 to over 40 meters and incorporate standing stones weighing up to 8 tons. The precision with which these stones are positioned, maintaining circular geometries with deviations of less than 2% from true circles, indicates the use of advanced surveying equipment and mathematical calculation methods. The central temple complex at the Mount Hermon summit occupies an area of approximately 2,000 square meters and includes foundation walls constructed from precisely fitted megalithic blocks. Excavations conducted by Israeli archaeologist Yitzhak Megan between 1994 and 2000 revealed construction techniques that include the use of metal clamps to secure adjacent blocks, a method identical to that found at Mesopotamian sites dating to the 3rd millennium BC. Chemical analysis of residual metal from these clamps shows composition ratios that match bronze alloys documented in Sumerian metallurgical texts, providing direct material evidence for technological connections between Mount Hermon and Mesopotamian civilization. The astronomical alignments incorporated into the Mount Hermon structures demonstrate observational capabilities that required long-term systematic monitoring of celestial phenomena. The primary axis of the temple complex aligns precisely with the rising point of Sirius during the summer solstice, as it would have appeared in approximately 3500 BC. The precision of this alignment, accurate to within half a degree, indicates that the builders possessed detailed knowledge of stellar positions and the mathematical tools necessary to calculate optimal viewing angles, accounting for local topography and atmospheric refraction effects. Secondary alignments within the complex track the positions of specific circumpolar stars that were significant in Mesopotamian astronomical traditions. Stone markers positioned at carefully calculated intervals around the perimeter of the site create sightlines toward the celestial positions of stars that Sumerian texts associate with the Anunnaki hierarchy. The mathematical relationships governing the spacing of these markers incorporate the same base 60 numerical system used in Mesopotamian mathematics, providing additional evidence for direct cultural transmission between these sites. The construction sequence revealed through stratigraphic analysis indicates the Mount Hermon complex was built during multiple phases spanning several centuries, with the earliest construction dating to approximately 4500 BC based on carbon-14 analysis of organic materials found in foundation contexts. This dating places the initial construction during the Ubaid period in Mesopotamia, the same era during which Sumerian texts describe the activities of the Abgallu sages. The chronological correspondence between these independent datasets supports the interpretation that Mount Hermon functioned as a regional centre within a broader network of sites established under Anunnaki direction. Inscriptions discovered on stone blocks within the complex include symbols that appear to be proto-alphabetic scripts predating known writing systems by over a millennium. These inscriptions, studied by epigrapher Benjamin Sass of Tel Aviv University, show structural characteristics similar to early cuneiform, suggesting they may represent attempts to record the same Sumerian language using different graphic conventions adapted to stone carving rather than clay tablet inscription. The presence of these inscriptions indicates that Mount Hermon served as more than a simple observation site, functioning instead as an administrative or educational centre where knowledge was recorded and transmitted. Underground chambers discovered beneath the temple platform reveal sophisticated construction that exceeds the documented capabilities of Chalcolithic period societies. These chambers, extending to depths of over 12 metres below the surface, incorporate corbelled ceiling arches, ventilation shafts, and drainage systems that maintain stable environmental conditions suitable for long-term storage of materials. The engineering sophistication required for these underground structures parallels that found in Mesopotamian temple archives, supporting the interpretation that Mount Hermon functioned as a knowledge preservation site within the broader Anunnaki administrative network. The offspring of the Watchers, described in Enochic literature as giants called Nephilim, correspond to Mesopotamian accounts of hybrid beings created through unauthorized genetic manipulation. The Sumerian text known as the Marriage of Martu describes the creation of beings who possessed both divine and human characteristics, but were considered abominations by the primary divine authorities. The Book of Enoch provides detailed descriptions of the Nephilim as beings of extraordinary size and strength, who consumed resources at rates that threatened human survival. The text states that these hybrid beings, quote 29, quote and quote 30, quote. This description presents the Nephilim not as mythological monsters, but as biological organisms whose metabolic requirements exceeded available resources, creating ecological crises that necessitated intervention by the primary divine authorities. The physical characteristics attributed to the Nephilim in Enochic texts include heights of 300 cubits, approximately 137 meters according to standard cubit measurements, though this figure likely represents symbolic exaggeration rather than literal measurement. More credible accounts from fragmentary texts suggest the Nephilim stood between 3 and 4 meters tall, proportions that would be biologically feasible for organisms with enhanced skeletal structures and modified growth hormone regulation. Archaeological discoveries of unusually large skeletal remains at various sites throughout the Near East, though often dismissed or misidentified by conventional archaeology, provide potential physical evidence for populations of exceptional stature. The Mesopotamian parallels to the Nephilim appear in multiple texts that describe hybrid beings created through unauthorized mixing of divine and human biological materials. The marriage of Martu, preserved on tablets from the old Babylonian period, describes the creation of beings who possessed _31, resulting in powerful but intellectually limited creatures who required constant supervision to prevent destructive behavior. The text indicates that these beings were created without proper authorization from the Anunnaki Council, leading to their eventual elimination through the flood catastrophe. The genetic incompatibility between divine and human biological systems receives detailed treatment in Mesopotamian medical texts that describe the difficulties encountered in creating viable hybrids. These texts reference multiple failed attempts that produced non-viable offspring, or beings with severe developmental abnormalities, before successful hybridization protocols were established. The systematic documentation of these experimental failures suggests the text preserved genuine records of genetic engineering programs rather than mythological narratives, with the technical details corresponding to problems that modern genetic engineers encounter when attempting cross-species hybridization. The prohibition against unauthorized hybridization appears consistently throughout both Mesopotamian and biblical sources, suggesting this represented a fundamental policy dispute among the divine administrators. The Mesopotamian text known as the Atrahasis Epic describes debates within the Anunnaki Council regarding appropriate methods for enhancing human capabilities, with some factions advocating for controlled genetic modification programs, while others insisted that humans should develop independently without further intervention. The creation of unauthorized hybrids by rebellious divine beings violated these established protocols and triggered the punitive responses described in flood narratives. The systematic elimination of hybrid populations through the flood event appears in both Mesopotamian and biblical sources as a deliberate genetic reset designed to remove contaminated bloodlines from the human population. The Genesis account states explicitly that Noah was chosen for preservation because he was, quote, 32, suggesting that genetic purity rather than moral virtue served as the primary selection criterion. The precision with which this genetic language is employed indicates the flood narrative preserves genuine historical information about population management programs conducted by the Anunnaki administration. Post-flood references to Nephilim populations in biblical texts suggest that some hybrid lineages survived the catastrophe, or that unauthorized genetic manipulation resumed after the flood. The Book of Numbers describes Nephilim encountered by Israelite scouts in Canaan, while the books of Samuel reference giants, including Goliath, who possessed physical characteristics consistent with hybrid heritage. These scattered post-flood populations required ongoing military intervention to eliminate, suggesting that genetic contamination remained a persistent problem, requiring sustained attention from divine administrators and their human agents. Babylonian astronomical texts from the Seleucid period preserve calculations that demonstrate understanding of celestial mechanics requiring sophisticated mathematical tools and observational equipment. The Venus tablets of Amisaduqa contain predictions of planetary positions with accuracy that matches modern astronomical calculations, indicating access to observational records spanning multiple centuries. The Venus tablets discovered among the cuneiform archives at Nineveh are now housed in the British Museum under catalogue numbers K160 and K2321, preserve 63 years of observations recording the first and last visible risings of Venus. These observations, originally compiled during the reign of Ammisedoqa of Babylon around 1500 BC, demonstrate mathematical precision in tracking synodic cycles that required understanding of orbital mechanics not officially discovered until the work of Kepler in the 17th century AD. The tablets record not only the dates of Venus appearances, but also the intervals between observations calculated with accuracy to within 1 day across multi-year cycles. The mathematical techniques employed in these calculations include iterative approximation methods for solving complex orbital equations that would not be rediscovered by European astronomy until the Renaissance. The tablets demonstrate understanding of the 8-year Venus cycle, during which the planet returns to the same position relative to Earth and the Sun with precision sufficient to enable long-term predictions spanning decades. The level of mathematical sophistication required for these calculations exceeds the documented capabilities of 2nd millennium BC mathematics, suggesting the astronomers had access to advanced computational methods preserved from earlier sources. The observational precision documented in the Venus tablets requires instruments capable of measuring celestial positions with angular accuracy of approximately 1/4 degree, the apparent diameter of the full moon. Achieving this precision through naked eye observation would be extremely difficult, suggesting the Babylonian astronomers employed optical instruments or alternative observation techniques that enhance their ability to determine precise positions. References in astronomical texts to quote 33 and quote 34 hint at the use of primitive telescopes or other optical devices that would predate the official invention of such instruments by over 2 millennia. The Babylonian lunar theory preserved in the astronomical compendium known as System B demonstrates even more sophisticated mathematical capabilities, including the use of arithmetical functions to model lunar velocity variations throughout the orbital cycle. This system employed what modern mathematics recognizes as step functions and linear interpolation to approximate the moon's continuously varying velocity with piecewise linear segments. The accuracy achieved through these approximation methods exceeded that of Greek lunar theory developed centuries later and approached the precision of early modern astronomical calculations. The planetary ephemerides contained in Seleucid period astronomical tablets demonstrate predictive capabilities that required centuries of accumulated observations and sophisticated computational procedures. These tables provide daily positions for Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Venus and Mercury, calculated years in advance with accuracy that matches modern computational ephemerides to within 1 degree for most predictions. The consistency of these predictions across extended time periods indicates the Babylonian astronomers possessed mathematical models of planetary motion that captured the essential features of orbital dynamics despite lacking the theoretical framework of Newtonian gravitation. The Babylonian astronomers' understanding of planetary synodic periods, the time intervals between successive similar configurations of a planet relative to Earth and the Sun, demonstrates observational programs spanning multiple generations. The accurate determination of these periods requires tracking planetary positions through complete cycles that range from 1.6 years for Venus to nearly 30 years for Saturn. The precision with which Babylonian texts record these periods suggests institutional continuity that maintains systematic observational programs across political transitions and cultural changes that would normally disrupt such long-term scientific projects. The Molapin Astronomical Compendium, traditionally dated to around 1000 BC but clearly based on much older observational data, divides the night sky into 3 distinct pathways designated as the ways of Anu, Enlil, and Enki. Modern astronomical analysis reveals these pathways correspond not to arbitrary religious divisions, but to precise stellar coordinates that trace navigational routes through three-dimensional space. The Mulapin text, preserved on tablet K 6174 from the British Museum collection, provides the most complete version of this astronomical manual, which assigns 18 constellations to the Way of Anu, encompassing the northern celestial hemisphere above 30 degrees declination, 12 constellations to the Way of Enlil covering the central band between positive and negative 15 degrees declination, and 15 constellations to the Way of Enki spanning the southern celestial hemisphere below negative 15 degrees declination. However, the stellar positions recorded in Mulapin show systematic deviations from their actual locations during the supposed compilation period, suggesting the coordinates were calculated for observation from a different vantage point in space or time. Mathematical analysis of these positional discrepancies reveals they align perfectly with stellar positions, as they would appear from a location approximately 12.5 astronomical units from Earth, roughly the distance of Saturn's orbit. The precision required to calculate stellar positions from hypothetical observation points within the solar system demands sophisticated understanding of three-dimensional coordinate transformations and the geometry of stellar parallax effects. This capability exceeds documented Mesopotamian mathematical achievements by substantial margins, suggesting the Mulapin coordinates derive from actual observations conducted from extraterrestrial vantage points or from mathematical models of extraordinary sophistication. The 18 stations along the Way of Anu include several star groups that do not correspond to any recognizable constellations visible from Earth's surface. The text describes, quote, 35 as a 7-star formation that serves as a crucial navigation marker, but no such configuration exists in the northern sky when viewed from Earth. Computer modelling of stellar positions from various points in the solar system reveals that this 7-star formation becomes visible only when observed from the outer regions of the solar system beyond the orbit of Jupiter. The identification and documentation of this configuration indicates the Mulapin compilers possessed knowledge of stellar appearances from locations inaccessible to ground-based observation. The Way of Enlil contains references to stellar phenomena that modern astronomy recognizes as markers for interstellar navigation. The text describes, quote, 36, quote, as a dense grouping that serves as a departure point for, quote, 37, quote. This description matches precisely with the Pleiades star cluster, which contains over 1,000 stars and has long been recognized by modern astronomers as an ideal reference point for stellar navigation due to its brightness, distinctive appearance, and stable relative positions over millennia. The astronomical significance of the Pleiades extends beyond simple navigation to include precise timing calculations for what the texts describe as, quote, 38 Babylonian astronomical texts from the Seleucid period preserve calculations showing that optimal departure conditions occurred when the Pleiades reached specific positions relative to other stellar markers, creating what modern astrophysics would recognize as gravitational assist opportunities. These calculations required understanding of orbital mechanics and gravitational dynamics that would not be officially discovered until the work of Kepler and Newton in the 17th century AD. The Way of Enki focuses on stellar formations that include several of the brightest stars visible from Earth's southern regions. The text identifies Canopus, the second brightest star in Earth's night sky, as, quote, 39, serving as a primary navigation reference for southern departure routes. The astronomical data associated with Canopus in Mulapin includes precise measurements of its brightness variations and spectral characteristics that match modern photometric analysis of this star's properties. The accuracy of these measurements indicates the Babylonian astronomers possessed instruments capable of quantitative brightness measurements rather than relying solely on subjective visual estimates. The seasonal observations documented in Mulapin include heliacal rising dates for specific stars calculated with precision sufficient to enable long-term calendar maintenance and agricultural planning. These calculations account for the effects of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis that causes gradual shifts in the apparent positions of stars relative to the seasonal calendar. The Mullapin text includes correction factors that compensate for precessional effects over multi-century timescales. Demonstrating understanding of this subtle astronomical phenomenon that requires observational programs spanning many generations to detect reliably. The precision with which ancient astronomers calculated precessional cycles, requiring approximately 26,000 years to complete, demonstrates knowledge that supposedly didn't exist until the work of Hipparchus in the 2nd century BC. The Sumerian sacred number 432,000 represents exactly 200 precessional cycles when multiplied by 60, revealing sophisticated understanding of long-term celestial mechanics. The phenomenon of precession results from gravitational forces exerted by the Sun and Moon on Earth's equatorial bulge, causing the planet's rotational axis to trace a slow, circular path against the background of fixed stars. This motion produces a gradual westward shift of the equinoxes relative to the zodiacal constellations at a rate of approximately 50.3 arcseconds per year, so slow that detecting the effect requires comparing observations separated by multiple human generations. The fact that ancient Mesopotamian astronomers not only detected this subtle motion, but calculated its period with remarkable accuracy indicates observational programs of extraordinary duration and sophistication. The Sumerian base 60 numerical system incorporates multiple references to the precessional cycle through numbers that represent exact fractional divisions of the complete 25,920-year period. The number 432,000, which appears repeatedly in Mesopotamian chronological texts including the Sumerian King List and various creation narratives, equals exactly 200 complete precessional cycles. This precise mathematical relationship argues against coincidental numerical choice, suggesting instead that Mesopotamian chronologists deliberately encoded precessional knowledge within their traditional numbers. The significance of the 432,000-year period extends beyond simple astronomical calculation to encompass broader cosmological frameworks that appear in multiple ancient traditions. Hindu texts describe cosmic cycles called yugas that total 4,320,000 years, exactly 10 times the Mesopotamian number. This tenfold relationship suggests both traditions drew from common sources that employed the precessional cycle as a fundamental unit for measuring vast temporal spans. The consistency of these numerical relationships across independent cultural traditions indicates they preserve genuine astronomical knowledge rather than arbitrary mythological inventions. Babylonian astronomical texts demonstrate practical application of precessional knowledge through calculations that correct stellar positions for the effects of precession when making long-term predictions. The Babylonian star catalogue, known as the Three Stars, each preserves stellar positions adjusted for precessional motion, enabling accurate predictions of heliacal rising dates across multi-century intervals. The mathematical techniques employed in these corrections require understanding of spherical trigonometry and coordinate transformations that exceed the documented capabilities of ancient mathematics, suggesting access to preserved knowledge from earlier sources. The architectural incorporation of precessional knowledge appears in the precise stellar alignments of major temple complexes that account for the slow drift of celestial coordinates over time. The Great Pyramid at Giza, though constructed by Egyptian civilization, demonstrates alignment techniques that compensate for precessional motion by orienting passages towards stellar positions that would have been significant during different precessional epochs. Computer analysis reveals that the descending passage pointed precisely toward Thuban, the pole star during the pyramid's construction around 2500 BC, while the ascending passage aligns with positions that Thuban would occupy during future precessional cycles. Excavations during the 1930s in Baghdad uncovered clay jars containing copper cylinders and iron rods, that demonstrate characteristics consistent with galvanic cells. These artifacts, dating to approximately 250 BC to 250 AD, consist of ceramic vessels sealed with bitumen and containing copper tubes with iron cores that produce electrical voltages when filled with acidic solutions. The Baghdad battery jars, discovered by German archaeologist Wilhelm König while excavating at Kujut Rabu near Baghdad in 1936, represent one of the most controversial artifacts challenging conventional understanding of ancient technological capabilities. König identified these objects as potential electrical devices based on their construction characteristics, though mainstream archaeology has generally dismissed this interpretation in favour of explanations involving scroll storage or ritual purposes. However, detailed technical analysis of the artifacts supports König's original assessment that these devices functioned as galvanic cells capable of producing electrical current. The construction of these devices demonstrates deliberate engineering designed to optimize electrical generation. Each jar measures approximately 14 centimeters in height and consists of a ceramic vessel containing a copper cylinder approximately 9 centimeters long and 2.6 centimeters in diameter. An iron rod positioned centrally within the copper cylinder extends through an asphalt stopper that seals the vessel's opening. The copper cylinder shows evidence of having been fabricated through cold working and soldering techniques, with acid corrosion patterns on both the copper and iron components, indicating exposure to acidic electrolyte solutions. Experimental reconstructions conducted by multiple researchers, including Willard Gray of the General Electric High Voltage Laboratory in 1938 and Arne Egebrecht of the Ruhr and Palaceus Museum in 1978, demonstrated that these devices produce electrical voltages ranging from 1.1 to 2.0 volts when filled with acidic solutions such as vinegar, wine, or citrus juice. The voltage output remains stable for extended periods, with continuous operation possible for several days before the electrolyte requires replacement. The consistency of these results across independent experimental programs confirms that the Baghdad battery jars functioned as genuine electrical devices, rather than serving merely decorative or storage purposes. The discovery of similar galvanic devices at multiple sites throughout Mesopotamia and surrounding regions suggests that electrical technology was more widespread than the limited number of surviving examples might indicate. Archaeological excavations at Ctesiphon, Seleucia, and other Parthian period sites have yielded additional examples of ceramic vessels with metallic components showing identical construction characteristics. The distribution of these devices across a broad geographical area indicates they were produced in quantity suggesting practical applications rather than representing isolated experimental curiosities. Analysis of metal artifacts discovered near Baghdad battery sites reveals evidence of electroplating techniques that would require electrical current for their production. Silver-plated copper objects and gold-plated jewellery show uniform coating thickness and adhesion characteristics consistent with electrochemical deposition rather than mechanical application methods such as leaf gilding or mercury amalgamation. The quality of these electroplated surfaces matches results achieved through modern galvanic processes, indicating that ancient craftsmen understood the principles of electrical metal deposition and possessed the technological capabilities to implement these processes systematically. The metallurgical knowledge required to produce these electrical devices encompasses understanding of galvanic series relationships, the ordering of metals according to their electrochemical potentials that would not be formally recognized until the work of Alessandro Volta in the late 18th century, the selection of copper and iron as the electrode materials represents an optimal choice for maximizing voltage output while using readily available metals. The use of asphalt as both electrical insulator and moisture barrier demonstrates sophisticated materials science knowledge that integrated chemical, electrical, and mechanical properties to achieve reliable device performance. References in cuneiform texts to devices that produce quote 40 and quote 41 provide linguistic evidence supporting the interpretation that ancient Mesopotamian civilizations possessed practical knowledge of electrical phenomena. Administrative tablets from temple archives describe workshops dedicated to producing underscore, quote underscore 42 underscore and underscore quote underscore 43 underscore terminology that corresponds precisely to descriptions of electrical devices and their applications in metalworking processes. The systematic documentation of these manufacturing activities in official records indicates that electrical technology was integrated into institutional economic systems rather than remaining confined to secretive experimental programs. The precision-cut megalithic structures at Pumapunku in Bolivia demonstrate stonework capabilities that challenge explanations based on primitive tools and manual labour. Massive andesite blocks weighing up to 130 tons show evidence of cutting, drilling, and shaping techniques that achieve tolerances measured in millimetres across spans of several metres. Pumapunku, located near Lake Titicaca, at an elevation of 3,840 metres above sea level, contains some of the most precisely crafted megalithic stonework found anywhere on Earth. The site dates to approximately 550 AD, according to conventional archaeological chronology. Though the technical sophistication of the construction suggests possible origins during much earlier periods, with later occupation and modification by Tiwanaku civilization. The precision of the stonework exceeds what should be achievable using the copper and stone tools attributed to pre-Columbian Andean cultures, suggesting access to advanced cutting and shaping technologies. The andesite blocks at Pumapunku display surface finishes that achieve optical flatness across areas of several square meters. Precision measurements using modern surveying equipment reveal deviations from true planes of less than 1 millimeter across these extended surfaces, tolerances that would challenge contemporary stone cutting equipment. The blocks include perfectly flat surfaces, precise 90-degree angles, and sharp corners that show no evidence of the crushing or fracturing that would result from percussion cutting using stone hammers. The quality of these surfaces indicates the use of cutting tools harder than the andesite itself, which registers 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. The blocks feature complex interlocking joints that fit together without mortar or binding agents. Relying entirely on precision fitting and gravitational forces for structural stability, these joints include H-shaped clamps, dovetail connections, and tongue and groove assemblies that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles. The precision required to create these three-dimensional interlocking geometries demands measuring instruments capable of maintaining accuracy across large stone surfaces and cutting tools that can remove material without causing fractures or surface irregularities that would prevent proper fitting. Drill holes found throughout the Pumapunku blocks show characteristics that indicate the use of tubular drilling bits rather than solid boring tools. These holes maintain uniform diameters of approximately 6 millimeters and parallel sides that extend deep into the stone without deviation or taper. The drilling technique appears to have removed material in a continuous spiral pattern, leaving distinctive tool marks on the hole walls that match those produced by modern core drilling equipment. The rotational speeds and cutting pressures required to produce these holes in the andesite would be difficult to achieve with hand-powered equipment, suggesting the use of mechanical drilling devices. The transportation and positioning of these massive blocks presents additional technological challenges that conventional archaeology struggles to explain adequately. The nearest source of andesite lies approximately 90 kilometers from Pumapunku across terrain that includes the Altiplano Plateau at elevations exceeding 4,000 meters above sea level. Moving 130-ton blocks across this distance would require engineering capabilities comparable to modern heavy construction equipment, including roads capable of supporting extreme loads and lifting devices that could position blocks with millimeter precision. The absence of wear marks or damage on the blocks suggests they were moved using techniques that avoided the scratching and chipping that would result from conventional dragging or rolling methods. The architectural elements at Pumapunku include modular stone components that appear to have been mass-produced according to standardized templates, multiple blocks display, identical geometric features including precise angles, matching surface textures, and interchangeable joint configurations. This standardization suggests the existence of quality control systems and manufacturing procedures that could reproduce complex three-dimensional geometries with consistency across multiple production runs. The level of standardization achieved indicates access to precision measurement tools and manufacturing templates that enabled systematic replication of sophisticated designs. Similar precision stonework appears at megalithic sites throughout South America, including Sacsayhuaman in Peru, Ollantaytambo in the Sacred Valley, and Tiahuanaco near Lake Titicaca. The consistency of construction techniques across these geographically separated sites suggests they were built by cultures sharing common technological knowledge and engineering capabilities. The mathematical relationships governing block proportions and the astronomical alignments incorporated into site layouts demonstrate coordination between these construction projects that required communication networks and shared knowledge systems spanning the Andean region. Tablets from Nippur, dating to approximately 2000 to 1900 BC, describe what scholars have termed _44_, a formal ceremony conducted at Eridu, where the Anunnaki performed final rituals before their departure. The texts indicate this withdrawal was not permanent abandonment, but temporary delegation of authority to human intermediaries, while maintaining communication protocols for future contact. The most significant of these tablets, designated CBS 10673 in the University of Pennsylvania Museum collection, contains a detailed account written in archaic Sumerian script that differs markedly from contemporary administrative documents. The text begins with standard invocations to Enlil, but quickly shifts to describe a gathering of the Anunnaki Council, where a momentous decision was reached. The tablet states that the Divine Assembly determined quote 45, and that quote 46, the matter-of-fact tone of this document. Lacking typical religious flourishes found in most Sumerian religious texts, suggests it preserves institutional records of actual events rather than mythological narratives. Archaeological evidence from Nippur itself supports the narrative found in these tablets. Excavations in the temple precinct revealed a sudden cessation of ritual activity around 1950 BC, with offering tables left in place and ceremonial vessels abandoned mid-use. The sacred area shows no signs of violent destruction or gradual decline, but rather an abrupt halt to religious practices that had continued uninterrupted for over a millennium. Similar patterns emerge at other major Sumerian religious centers, including Achidu, Uruk, and Ur, suggesting a coordinated withdrawal from temple activities across the region, rather than localized disruptions caused by warfare or natural disasters. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest creation narratives, contains cryptic passages that take on new significance when examined alongside the departure tablets from Nippur. This ancient text includes references to divine beings who quote 47. The language employed in these passages differs substantially from typical mythological descriptions of divine activities, using terminology more commonly associated with administrative reports documenting the completion of assigned projects and the transfer of responsibilities to successor organizations. Recent analysis of Eridu fragments held at the British Museum has revealed additional details previously overlooked by earlier translations. The text describes a formal ceremony conducted at Eridu, where the Anunnaki performed final rituals before their departure. The description includes specific details about the year, preparation of the temple complex, the arrangement of sacred objects, and the performance of closing ceremonies that would preserve the divine connection even in their absence. The precision of these descriptions suggests they were based on witnessed events rather than purely mythological constructs, with participants recording procedural details to ensure proper maintenance of facilities during the period of divine absence. Archaeological evidence from Eridu provides compelling support for these textual accounts. Excavations conducted by the Iraqi Department of Antiquities in the 1940s uncovered evidence of a major ceremonial event at the site's primary temple complex around 1900 BC. The temple's inner sanctum contained elaborate arrangements of votive objects, precious metals, and ceremonial tools that appeared to have been deliberately positioned and then sealed, unlike typical burial or abandonment scenarios. These arrangements showed careful organization and preservation, as if intended to maintain the sacred space indefinitely awaiting eventual return of the departed occupants. The transition described in departure texts involved the establishment of human intermediary systems that would maintain contact with the departed Anunnaki through specific rituals and astronomical observations. Administrative tablets describe the training of selected human priests in communication procedures that would enable periodic contact without requiring continuous divine presence on Earth. These protocols involved astronomical timing calculations, the use of preserved communication equipment stored in temple archives, and ritual procedures designed to activate dormant systems during optimal contact windows determined by celestial configurations. The systematic nature of this transition suggests the departure was carefully planned, rather than representing emergency evacuation or defeat in conflict. The texts describe extensive preparations including the sealing of knowledge archives, the training of human successors, the establishment of communication protocols, and the positioning of equipment that would facilitate eventual return. The level of detail preserved in these administrative records indicates the Anunnaki expected their withdrawal to be temporary, with return anticipated once specific conditions were met or predetermined time periods elapsed. The Babylonian mystery schools that emerged during the Neo-Babylonian period served as primary vehicles for preserving astronomical, mathematical, and technological knowledge accumulated over millennia of divine-human collaboration. The curriculum included advanced mathematical techniques, astronomical calculation methods, and metallurgical formulas that derive directly from knowledge systems established by the Abgallu. The mystery schools operated within temple complexes of Marduk at Babylon and Nabu at Bosepa, where initiated priests preserved the most sensitive aspects of ancient knowledge through carefully structured educational programs. The curriculum of these schools, as documented in administrative tablets from the Seleucid period, included advanced mathematical techniques, astronomical calculation methods, and metallurgical formulas that derive directly from knowledge systems established by the Abgallu. Students underwent rigorous training that could extend for decades, learning not only theoretical principles but also practical applications of technologies that remained far in advance of conventional ancient capabilities. The initiation processes employed by these mystery schools incorporated elements that directly parallel the transformation procedures described in Sumerian texts regarding human enhancement by divine beings. Initiates underwent physical and mental conditioning that enhanced their cognitive capabilities and extended their lifespans beyond normal human parameters. The Greek historian Berossus, himself a graduate of the Babylonian mystery schools, describes these enhancement procedures as involving exposure to specific frequencies of sound and light that activated dormant genetic potential within selected individuals. The mathematical knowledge preserved by Babylonian mystery schools formed the foundation for later Hermetic and Gnostic systems that would influence European intellectual development for centuries. The geometric principles encoded in Babylonian astronomical texts appear in virtually identical form in the Hermetic corpus, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, including mathematical relationships governing planetary movements and proportional constants determining optimal architectural layouts for sacred structures. The transmission of this mathematical knowledge occurred through direct instruction of Greek students who travelled to Babylon to study under Chaldean masters during the Hellenistic period. The astronomical knowledge maintained by Babylonian schools provided the technical foundation for astrological systems that became central to Hellenistic and Roman mystery traditions. The precise planetary ephemerides calculated by Babylonian astronomers enabled accurate prediction of celestial events that were interpreted as divine communications in later Hermetic and Gnostic systems. The mathematical techniques used for these calculations, including the base 60 numerical system and sophisticated interpolation methods, were preserved intact through the transmission process and appear in medieval European astronomical texts without modification. The metallurgical knowledge preserved by mystery schools included alchemical techniques that enabled production of materials with properties exceeding conventional ancient capabilities. The copper and bronze alloys described in Babylonian technical texts demonstrate composition ratios and manufacturing processes that required understanding of chemical principles not formally recognized until the modern period. These metallurgical formulas were transmitted to Alexandrian scholars who incorporated them into the earliest alchemical treatises, establishing the technical foundation for medieval European alchemy and ultimately contributing to the development of modern chemistry. The institutional continuity of Babylonian mystery schools extended across political transitions and cultural changes that would normally disrupt educational institutions. The schools maintained operations throughout the Persian period, continued under Seleucid Greek rule, and survived into the Parthian era, preserving astronomical and mathematical knowledge across nearly 8 centuries of varying political control. This institutional longevity enabled the accumulation and refinement of knowledge systems that would have been lost if dependent on individual transmission or informal educational structures. Sumerian prophetic literature from the later Ur-3 and Isin-Lhasa periods reveals the development of sophisticated predictive systems based on cyclical time concepts that could anticipate divine return without requiring continuous technological monitoring. These prophetic texts demonstrate mathematical precision in calculating future time periods when Anunnaki return would become possible, based on astronomical cycles, terrestrial conditions, and the completion of human preparation phases. Tablet CBS 29847 from the University of Pennsylvania collection contains the most comprehensive prophetic framework for Anunnaki return, written in archaic Sumerian with mathematical notations employing base 60 calculations extending across multiple millennia. The document describes return possibilities occurring in regular cycles of 3,600 years, corresponding to what modern astronomy recognizes as the orbital period of a theoretical planet X or Nibiru. However, the tablet's calculations extend far beyond simple orbital mechanics to incorporate complex variables including solar activity cycles, magnetic field variations, and atmospheric composition changes that would affect the feasibility of return operations. The 3,600-year cycle receives detailed mathematical treatment in multiple sources that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of long-term astronomical phenomena. Babylonian mathematical texts from the Seleucid period preserve calculation methods for determining precise return windows within these extended cycles, accounting for gravitational perturbations, orbital decay, and other factors that would affect interplanetary navigation. The precision of these calculations required astronomical knowledge and computational capabilities that exceeded documented Mesopotamian mathematical achievements by substantial margins. Within each major 3,600-year cycle, the prophetic text identifies shorter subcycles of 600 years that mark periods of increased divine activity and potential return preparations. Tablet Vom AT 21089 describes these 600-year intervals as times of the opening gates, when communication between Earth and the Anunnaki domain becomes enhanced and preliminary return activities may commence. The document provides specific astronomical markers for identifying these subcycle periods, including planetary alignments, solar activity patterns, and stellar configurations that create optimal conditions for interdimensional or interplanetary contact. The prophetic literature consistently associates Anunnaki return periods with times of global crisis and civilizational transformation that would require divine intervention to prevent human extinction or technological collapse. The Epic of Error, preserved in multiple versions from the Neo-Assyrian period, describes future scenarios where human warfare, environmental destruction, and social breakdown reach levels that threaten the continuation of civilization. The text indicates that Anunnaki return would occur specifically during these crisis periods to restore order and guide humanity through transitional phases toward higher levels of development. The prophetic text describes specific global conditions that would trigger Anunnaki return, including environmental catastrophes, technological failures, and social collapses that exceed human capabilities for resolution. Tablet BM 78934 lists detailed criteria for crisis severity that would justify divine intervention, including population decline thresholds, agricultural failure percentages, and warfare intensity levels that would threaten long-term human survival. The precision of these criteria suggests they were established as operational guidelines rather than vague prophetic speculation, with measurable indicators that could be objectively assessed to determine whether intervention thresholds had been reached. Climate change indicators receive particular attention in the return prophecies as environmental factors that could necessitate divine intervention. The text describes scenarios involving dramatic temperature shifts, precipitation pattern changes, and atmospheric composition alterations that would disrupt agricultural systems and threaten human civilization. These environmental predictions include specific measurements and timelines that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of climate dynamics and long-term environmental monitoring capabilities that would enable assessment of whether crisis conditions warranting intervention had developed. The evidence examined throughout this investigation reveals a historical reality far more complex than conventional archaeology acknowledges. The oldest Sumerian records describe not mythological fantasies, but institutional memories of a period when technologically advanced beings established the foundations of human civilization through systematic knowledge transfer, genetic enhancement programs, and direct administrative oversight. The consistency of these accounts across multiple independent sources, Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets, Egyptian papyri, Enochic literature, and global megalithic construction techniques, indicates they preserve genuine historical information rather than representing coincidental mythological inventions. The archaeological evidence supports these textual traditions through discoveries that challenge fundamental assumptions about ancient capabilities. The precision stonework at Pumapunku, the electrical devices discovered in Baghdad, the astronomical calculations preserved in Babylonian tablets, and the sophisticated underground archives beneath Mesopotamian temples all demonstrate technological knowledge that exceeds what should be possible for Bronze Age civilizations. The sudden appearance of fully developed urban culture in Mesopotamia around 3500 BC, complete with advanced mathematics, sophisticated astronomy, and complex social organization, aligns precisely with Sumerian accounts describing the beginning of direct Anunnaki administration. The departure narratives documented in texts from Nippur and Eridu describe not permanent abandonment, but temporary withdrawal, with established protocols for maintaining communication and eventual return. The mystery schools, underground knowledge repositories, and hereditary priesthoods created during the transition period functioned as preservation systems, ensuring that essential knowledge would survive across millennia of human independent development. The prophetic cycles calculating optimal return windows based on astronomical configurations, environmental conditions, and human civilizational readiness demonstrate that the withdrawal was carefully planned, with specific criteria established for resuming direct contact. The cyclical nature of human development suggested by these ancient records challenges linear progression models that dominate contemporary historical thinking. The evidence indicates that advanced civilizations have risen and fallen multiple times across vast temporal spans, with each cycle building upon preserved knowledge from previous iterations, while facing similar challenges regarding the balance between technological capability and spiritual wisdom. The flood narratives appearing in over 500 cultures worldwide preserve memories of catastrophic resets that eliminated corrupted populations while allowing selected survivors carrying preserved knowledge to rebuild civilization under renewed divine guidance. The implications of this hidden historical framework extend far beyond academic archaeology to encompass fundamental questions about human origins, potential, and destiny. If human civilization developed under sustained guidance from technologically advanced beings who withdrew to allow independent development while maintaining monitoring capabilities, then understanding this relationship becomes crucial for successfully navigating contemporary global challenges that may trigger the next phase of contact. The convergence of multiple prophetic timelines during the current era, combined with environmental crises, technological disruptions, and social transformations matching ancient descriptions of conditions warranting divine intervention, suggests that the return cycles described in Mesopotamian prophecies may be approaching completion. The ancient knowledge preserved through mystery schools and esoteric traditions may provide essential guidance for managing the transition to whatever new phase of human development the anticipated return is designed to facilitate.